Well, it's been quite a while now since the dinghy was finished, and I've just realised really that I haven't really rounded off this series of videos on building a dinghy at home by showing you the finished article. So basically the dinghy rigged up and out on the water sailing, just to prove that it floats. So I didn't have the GoPro with me on the day that we launched her, so this was back in November last year. We took her up to Rutland Water, and there were some issues really around, getting the boat in the water, remembering to wear life jackets on the pontoon. So some people couldn't actually be on the pontoon, so that's why it was difficult to get some shots and video. So I'll put together what I've got, some still shots, and I'll talk through the rigging issues and the rigging ideas, and also then I'll show some of the video taken of the boat out on the water actually sailing. And then at the end I'm going to do a cost breakdown. So right, let's crack on. So here we can see the dinghy sat on the lawn. It's still unpainted at this stage because I wanted to get the rigs all set up. The mast, the boom, the sail, all of the running rigging, just to see where the attachment points were and where I needed to add some blocks or pieces of ply, epoxy them onto the boat so that I could actually attach the fittings, and then that needed to be done before painting. So yeah, that's what this was. This photograph shows the aft part, the aft section of the dinghy. I've actually put some non-slip in there, tried to figure out where the best place would be to put it based on where I thought the feet would go. And you can see that the transom is kind of partially left unpainted to give it some contrast. This photo shows the forward section, and here you can see the foredeck and the daggerboard case top have been left natural, and you can also see the non-skid in the bottom, and also the blocks where the halyards run through. This photo shows the boat fully rigged in the back garden again. So this time it's all painted up, all the fittings are fitted, and all the rigging is run as it should out on the water. So all ready to go, although it is badly rigged at this stage. This one shows the front section in the water at Rutland. We tried to put the two halves together while in the water, and it was too difficult, so we ended up doing that out on the pontoon. Oh yeah, that's better. But now I'm going backwards. So we finally got her rigged up, and this is now the first ever attempt to sail the dinghy. And at this stage, there's not enough tension on the downhaul.
You've got to test that the sails work, which they do. You're moving away from us slowly. Huh? You're moving away from us slowly.
Go round. So there's nowhere near enough tension on the leech. So the sail could be pulled down a little bit more on the boom, so a bit more downhaul, and also the attachment point for the main sheet at the back was also quite high. So it meant even when I pulled on the main sheet really tight, it wasn't pulling the boom down anywhere near far enough. So I haven't figured it out just yet. I'm still trying to figure it out here. But eventually I tightened up that tracking sheet, as it were. So you can see in a moment I'll pull in the main sheet here, and you can see that block goes right up to the boom, so I can't now actually pull the boom any lower with that main sheet. So by tightening up that kind of triangle of line at the back, I managed to get the boom a lot lower, and then she was far better. I can't do anything.
You do have oars.
So after I realised that the main sheet traveller was too loose and allowing the block for the main sheet to lift up too much, and I really tightened that up so the block couldn't lift as far. So that meant when I pulled in on the main sheet, that really pulled the boom down and tightened up the leech nicely and let me make the most of these really light winds. And as you can see now, I'm actually moving, finally. Actually moving so well, I can even try my first tack. And now heading back directly downwind, back towards the pontoon. You can see I'm sitting in the middle of the boat, trying to stabilise it, wind directly behind. All good.
I would have to go right slow now.
Go back slowly.
this photograph, it looks very much like I could do with a little bit more outhaul on that mainsail. You laser sailors might be able to assure me of that. And the boat feels really nice and well balanced running downwind. And here I'm taking out the first volunteer crew. So again, it's a shame there's not much more wind. It did rise slightly later on in the afternoon, but we managed to tack out to where those trees are in the top right-hand corner. 4 or 5 tacks, all went well. Yeah, very pleased with the boat. Yeah, very pleased. The boat sailed really well with 2 people, tacking and jibing and running downwind. So here we are coming back in. Here we have the second crew member coming back in. Winds were a little bit higher than they were previously, but still didn't get too much further out. And it's starting to get dark now, so we really need to come back in and get the boat out of the water. So here's a very quick look at the cost breakdowns then. A lot of costs went on materials such as plywood, epoxy and epoxy consumables. So not only the resin, but the gloves, the mixing sticks, the thickeners, all kinds of things. Quite a lot went on hardware as well, which is things like the pintles and gudgeons for the rudder, blocks and plates to attach blocks to. But generally, I think it was a reasonable spend. Didn't go overboard, tried to keep the costs down. Could have maybe shaved a few pounds off here and there. And I've also got some nice tools left over as well. So yeah, all in all, I think it was a really good project. So the key points then. I would say, first of all, watch out for a bad ply sandwich. I think my first disaster was caused by a badly sandwiched piece of ply. If you look at this second photo, this central ply is really thick. So it's just one thick central piece with 2 thin veneers, and that's it. This, I think, is why the ply broke, as it was not quite supple enough to bend as needed. Compare this to photo 3, which is from a different piece of ply, which didn't need to bend, but which has 3 pieces of ply with the 2 thin veneers. So these sheets of ply were all from the same supplier, sent to me as 4 sheets of 8x4 1/4" ply, all exactly the same. So out of these 4 sheets, only one of them was this badly sandwiched type. But unfortunately, I didn't know to check and unknowingly used this one bad sheet for my forward starboard side floor. And this was destined to need to bend. I guess with 2 pieces of floor needed from 4 sheets of ply, it was a 50-50 shot that one of them would come from that bad sheet. And I just got unlucky. But had I checked, I could have probably stopped that from happening. The second point is that the dovetail joints that I spent 2 days cutting into the floor sections to strengthen the joint were in fact completely unnecessary. In fact, had I not had the disaster and needed to contact B&B Yacht Designs for assistance with how to deal with it, they probably wouldn't have seen this joint and advised me to glass over it. So in future, I wouldn't bother with those dovetails. I would just leave the edges straight and bind them together with a simple butt joint with glass tape over both sides. B&B tell me this is adequately strong enough for the joint. The third point then is when gluing the top and floor sections together at the nose, I used some plastic that was too light, so it was quite thin, and this somehow stuck to the epoxy, and I lightly sanded this off, and this was a big mistake. So this led to my second disaster when the joint cracked slightly during opening. I should have left the mess of plastic and epoxy until much later and only sanded it off after the nose was strengthened with the bulkhead in place and all the joint strengthened, and basically the only reason I would need to sand is for painting. So I should have left that to the very end. But possibly not using that thin plastic to start with would be the top tip. Point 4, the nesting bulkhead position is not clearly dimensioned on the plans. Well, at least I couldn't find it. I think this is probably because it depends to an extent on each individual boat and how it shapes up. So I tried to measure from the plans and scale this up, and this was a mistake. So with the first time I tried to open the butterfly before I had the disaster, the bulkhead, I couldn't actually get it to fit I couldn't get it to actually fit inside the boat because it was really not dimensioned properly for where I was trying to put it. So I would say as long as the aft half is bigger than the front half, you just really should go where the bulkhead will naturally sit. And on the second attempt, this is exactly what I did, and it was a much better fit. Point 5 is clamps. I read somewhere that you can't have enough clamps when building a boat, and now I fully agree. First of all, I bought 6, then I bought 8 more, and then 2 more, and finally I ended up having to buy some plastic piping as I still didn't have enough. So in this photo, I'm actually using 20 clamps, including 4 pieces of drain pipe, and that was just about enough. Probably could have used 2 or 4 more for sure. Point 6 is homemade jigs. So I made these jigs, one for the rudder stock and another for the centerboard and center seat. I just knocked these up from spare pieces of hardboard and some softwood, and they were very useful to enable me to hold the various pieces that I was painting and varnishing without them touching the floor. Point 7 is rowlocks. So I made some small blocks to fit these rowlocks so that I didn't need to drill and screw into the gunwales, which I still think is a really good idea. But now I have the pivot points for the rowlocks too far inboard, and the oars are scraping on the gunwales when in use, and this scrapes off the paint. So I need to move these outboard a centimetre or so. So to do that, I'll probably have to take them off, cut into the blocks with a chisel, and then reattach them so that the rowlock centres are a little bit more outboard. Point 8 is the laser rig. It's worked really well so far, although there's only been one outing in quite light airs. So I actually needed to have the cap removed, the cap strap removed from the sail, and a cringle added at the top to enable a halyard to be used. I also needed to add a small block at the top of the mast to run the halyard through, but because the sail sleeve is quite tight, there was no space to allow a cheek block to be screwed onto the mast. So my solution was to add a very small line, which was pushed through a hole I drilled in the top plastic end on top of the mast, and then knotted so it couldn't pull out. And then I attached the block to this. So obviously I had to remove that end cap and then reattach it with some rivets. So point 9 is epoxy use. Initially, I bought 8 kilos of epoxy. This is measured as resin plus hardener as a combined total. And I bought this from Professional Epoxy Coatings in Kendal. I bought this because it is non-toxic and it is suitable for use in a domestic setting, as I was building the dinghy in a home rather than a garage or shed. I thought 8 kilos would be just about enough, and I was very careful not to waste too much. But I subsequently needed to buy another 3 kilograms, then I bought another 6, then another 1.5, then another 1.5. So in total, I ended up buying 20 kilos. So it probably would have been a lot cheaper to buy more than the 8 kilos at the very start. However, I did give the whole dinghy 3 full coats of epoxy inside and out, including the seats, the centerboard, the rudder, the tiller, inside the tanks, everywhere. So maybe you might think I went a little bit overboard with the epoxy there. And also, I later decided to glass the inside floors of the dinghy as well to make the floor more hard-wearing. And I'd already given the floors 3 coats of epoxy, so you may say I probably used more than was necessary. I bought a 25 by 1 metre roll of fiberglass cloth. This was a little bit too much, well, quite a lot too much, but it was only £5 more expensive than, I think, probably the 12 metre roll, and that would have been cutting it a little bit too fine. So that was actually a good move, even though I've got quite a lot left over. Initially, I thought I might need 10 pairs of gloves, which was quite funny, because then I bought another 10 from a supermarket, and then I decided to buy a box of 100, and then another box of 100, and another box of 100, and another box of 100, making over 400 pairs at least used from the ones I bought in hundreds, plus, dozens of smaller quantities as well here and there. The type of glove I liked in the end was the non-powder blue nitrile ones. Those are really good. So finally, on the hardware side, I bought the suggested Racelight RL 358 pintle and gudgeon package, which I had shipped over from the US. This ended up costing me £36, and this was a lot cheaper than any of the dinghy class gudgeon and pintle sets that I could find in the UK, which were surprisingly expensive, sometimes well over £100. So the only issue really was that the US set was that I had to drill out the imperial holes so that I could get my metric bolts through. Or also, the gudgeons needed to be bent and sort of splayed slightly and then bent around to fit the rudder stock, which is a lot wider than these gudgeons will naturally fit. So this was a bit disconcerting at first. but it was easy enough to do when I'd got a couple of pairs of pliers on the job. So that's it really. The dinghy project is complete. I have a nesting dinghy with a laser rig and an added reefing point, all built in 22 months, part-time, in my dining room for around 2.5k. Would I do it again? For sure, yes, and I might one day build another, but possibly next time I'll build something a little larger that can still be trailered. I've discovered I enjoy working with wood, not quite so much epoxy, but I do also enjoy seeing the results of varnishing. Perhaps in future I'll build something varnished to highlight the beauty of natural wood. In the meantime, good luck to you if you decide to go ahead with such a project, and do get in touch if you have any questions. All the best.